My parents fired me. After 15 years leading the engineering team, my younger brother smirked during the meeting. We can get 3 junior engineers for your salary. Nothing personal, just cost-cutting. I silently packed my things and left. That's when their desperate calls began. I'm Matthew Hayes, 38 years old. After dedicating 15 years to building my family's company from the ground up, my own parents let me go because I was too expensive. Before I tell you how their panicked calls led to the most unbelievable corporate takeover you've ever heard of, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always cool to see how far these stories travel. It happened on a Tuesday. I remember the air in the conference room was thick with unspoken tension, the kind that makes your neck prickle. My father, Richard, sat at the head of the long mahogany table, his face a mask of corporate neutrality, a definite bad sign. My mother, Sarah, sat to his right, her gaze fixed on an insignificant scratch on the table, anything to avoid looking at me. Across from me, my younger brother, Dylan, wore a smirk that was both triumphant and cruel. He wasn't even trying to hide it. For 15 years, Hayes Properties had been my entire world. I'd personally designed its complete digital infrastructure, from tenant application portals, across our 50 complexes in 3 states, to the intricate maintenance request system, and the secure payment processing network that handled millions. Monthly, it all came from my mind and my hands. I built it to be the silent, reliable backbone of our family's success. My father cleared his throat, a dry rasping sound. Matthew, he began, his voice laced with a cold formality he never used with me, not even in business. We've been reviewing the company's finances with a consulting firm. He slid a glossy, spiral-bound binder across the polished table. Its cover read, Operational Efficiency Analysis. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. For weeks, these cost slashers, as I'd mentally nicknamed them, had been roaming the halls, asking superficial questions and nodding sagely as if they understood the answers. It's a simple matter of overhead, my mother chimed in, her voice thin and reedy, still aimed at the table's scratch. Your salary, Matthew, it's a significant line item. A very significant one. Then Dylan leaned forward, elbows on the table, his smirk widening into a full-blown grin. We can get 3 junior engineers for what we pay you, Matt, he said, his voice dripping with satisfaction he'd clearly been waiting years to express. Nothing personal. It's just cost-cutting. Smart business. Nothing personal. The words hung in the airless room, sucking out whatever oxygen was left. 15 years of 2 a.m. server reboots, cancelled dates, holidays spent troubleshooting a system only I understood. I'd built them an empire on a rock-solid digital foundation, and they were dismissing me like a faulty piece of hardware they could just swap out. I didn't argue, I didn't yell. What was the point? I just looked at my father, then my mother. For a fleeting second, I saw a flicker of guilt in my mother's eyes before she stamped it out. My father's face remained a blank wall. They had already made their decision. I stood up, pushed my chair in silently, and nodded once. I understand, I said, and the lie tasted like ash in my mouth. As I walked back to my office, the one I'd occupied for over a decade, I passed the main server room. Through the reinforced glass, I could see the familiar, comforting blinking green lights of the system I'd created. On one of the monitors, a small, unassuming line of text was visible in the system's back-end diagnostic log. Data archiving protocols scheduled to run in 60 days. A routine I'd built. A routine that needed my oversight. A ticking time bomb they didn't even know existed. I walked into my office and picked up an empty cardboard box. Packing up 15 years of your life is a strange process. It doesn't take as long as you'd think. A few framed photos of friends, a coffee mug that said, World's okayest coder, a stack of technical manuals I'd practically memorized. The whole time, a reel of memories played in my head, not the good ones, but the small cuts, the 1,000 tiny moments of being taken for granted that I had systematically ignored for years. I wasn't just their son, I was effectively their first employee. I remembered the true beginning, working out of the damp, musty basement of their first small office building. While they were out hustling, making deals, and shaking hands, I was down there, surrounded by cinder block walls, fueled by lukewarm coffee and an almost naive belief in what we were building together. I taught myself to code, not because I had a passion for it initially, but because we couldn't afford to hire a professional. I was the one who pieced together our first server from salvaged parts. The one who ran Ethernet cables along the ceiling with a staple gun. The system grew organically as the company exploded. One property complex became 5, then 20, then 50 across Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. With every acquisition, the system I built became more complex, more essential. It wasn't just a convenience, it was the company's central nervous system. It handled rent payments with ruthless efficiency. It dispatched maintenance crews based on an algorithm I designed, minimizing travel time and maximizing tenant satisfaction, which kept our occupancy rates the highest in the region. It was our single biggest competitive advantage, and I was the architect. The problem was, I was also the only one who truly understood it. That wasn't by choice. It was by budget. For at least the last 5 years, I had been practically begging them to invest in building a proper tech department. I'd walk into my father's spacious office, armed with detailed proposals and charts showing the exponential growth in data and user requests. "Dad, we need to hire at least to support techs," I'd say, pointing to a graph that showed our server load approaching critical levels. "And we absolutely have to start documenting the system architecture. If I get hit by a bus tomorrow, you guys are flying blind." My father would lean back in his expensive leather chair I knew for a fact my system had paid for several times over, and he'd give me that placating, dismissive smile. "Son, the money is tight right now. Every spare dollar has to go into acquiring that new property portfolio in Pittsburgh. Besides," he'd add, with a hearty pat on my shoulder, "you handle it all so well on your own. Why pay for more people when we have the best right here?" My mother's approach was different, a softer form of invalidation. "Oh, Matthew, you always worry so much," she'd say, waving her hand as if shooing away a fly. "It's all just computers and wires. As long as the rent checks keep coming in, it's working. Don't overcomplicate things." I remember one Thanksgiving vividly. I was supposed to be at my then-girlfriend's family dinner, a big step for us. At 2 p.m., just as they were pulling the turkey out of the oven, my phone blew up. A power surge at one of our main data hubs had corrupted a critical database. I spent the next 6 hours on the phone and remotely logged in, painstakingly rebuilding the index from a backup. I saved the company from a potential week-long outage. When I finally called my father late that night to tell him the crisis was averted, he just said, "Good job, son, knew you could handle it," and then told me all about the delicious turkey Dylan had carved. He never asked what I had missed. My girlfriend broke up with me a week later. The only person in that entire company who seemed to get it was Frank, our head of maintenance. Frank was a lifer, a guy with calloused hands and engine grease permanently under his fingernails. He'd seen me grow up from a skinny kid in the basement to the man who ran the whole digital show. One afternoon, after another frustrating budget meeting, he found me in the server room, just staring at the blinking lights. "Don't let him get to you, Matt," he said, his voice a low rumble. "This whole place, this entire 50 complex operation, it runs on what's inside your head. They haven't got a clue. They think it's the buildings that make the money. It's not, it's this." He tapped the glass of a server rack with a thick finger. "It's you." His words were a small comfort, but the frustration kept growing, especially after Dylan officially came on board. He'd graduated with a business degree, and my parents immediately made him vice president of operations. He got a corner office, a fat expense account, and a complete lack of understanding of how the business actually ran. I remember him walking into my office once, seeing my whiteboards covered in complex diagrams, and saying, "So, you just make the computers work. Seems pretty straightforward." He saw me as the nerdy older brother, the guy in the back room who was a necessary but overpriced utility. He resented my salary because he couldn't quantify my work on one of his simplistic spreadsheets. I was a problem to be solved, not an asset to be valued. Then came the consultants. They were introduced to us by Mr. Henderson, an old family friend, a guy who played golf with my dad every Saturday. "Richard, you have to meet these guys," Henderson had said at a 4th of July barbecue, his voice booming with feigned sincerity. "They're absolute wizards. They'll find efficiencies in your operation you never even knew you had." The wizards from Cosslashers Incorporated were 2 slick guys in suits that probably cost more than my first car. They spoke entirely in buzzwords: synergy, optimization, right-sizing, value-added, attrition. They produced colorful charts and glossy PowerPoint slides that all said the same thing in 100 different ways: cut costs. And the biggest, easiest, most value-added cost to cut, they pointed out with a flourish, was the highly paid head of engineering who, in their expert opinion, could be easily replaced by a team of cheaper, younger, and more agile talent. They presented their findings to my parents in the main conference room. I was invited but not asked to speak. I just had to sit there and listen as these 2 charlatans, who probably couldn't even tell the difference between a server and a microwave, explained how my 15 years of specialized knowledge was a liability. "You're paying for legacy knowledge," one of them said smoothly, looking at my father. "In today's fast-moving tech landscape, you want nimble, hungry juniors. You can get 3 of them for this one salary. Think of the immediate My parents, already feeling the intense financial pressure from a bad real estate investment they'd made on the artifact they'd carefully hidden from me, saw the consultant's proposal as a magic bullet. It wasn't just about my salary. It was about finding a simple, validating solution to a complex problem they were too proud to admit they had created. Firing me was easier than admitting they gambled and lost millions. Looking back, all the signs were there. The way Mr. Henderson would ask me overly specific questions about our system security protocols at family gatherings. The way my parents would awkwardly change the subject whenever I brought up long-term, strategic planning. They weren't just being cheap, they were being desperate. And Dylan was just happy to finally be the undisputed prince, with the court wizard out of the way. I sealed the cardboard box with a long, loud strip of packing tape. As I carried it out of my office for the last time, I passed Frank in the hallway. He just looked at me, his eyes full of a sad, weary understanding. He shook his head slowly. "They just made the biggest mistake of their lives, son," he whispered. At the time, I thought he was just being a loyal friend. I had no idea how prophetic his words would turn out to be. I walked out into the bright afternoon sun, leaving the blinking green lights and my entire family behind. I felt a profound sense of loss, but underneath it, something else was stirring. Cold, hard resolve. They had made their business decision. Now it was time for me to make mine. That night, after dropping the box of my former life in the corner of my silent apartment, I opened my laptop. An unread email sat in my inbox. The subject line was simple, direct, and professional. Interview invitation, Chief Systems Architect. The sender was Ridgeview Management, our biggest, smartest, and most successful competitor. The first 2 months after I left Hayes Properties were a strange and surreal gift of silence. For the first time in 15 years, my phone wasn't a time bomb of emergency calls, a constant source of low-grade anxiety. I could eat a meal without mentally troubleshooting a database error. I slept through the night, every night. I went through 3 rounds of intense, rewarding interviews with Ridgeview Management. Their CEO, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Eleanor Vance, didn't just ask me about my skills. She grilled me on my philosophy of system design, on scalability, on building resilient, future-proof platforms. It was a conversation I had longed to have with my own father for years, a conversation about building, not just maintaining. Then, exactly 59 days after I was fired, Frank called me. It wasn't on my old work phone, of course, but on my personal cell, a number only a handful of people had. "Matt, it's Frank," he said, his voice tight with a specific kind of tension. I knew all too well. "It sounds like something's breaking. We've got a problem, a big one." "What's going on, Frank?" I asked, my heart starting to pound with a familiar, unwelcome rhythm. "The system's acting up badly. Maintenance requests are vanishing into thin air. It's not just a glitch. It's like they were never even filed. Dylan's new hotshot tech kid, Chad, keeps telling everyone it's a minor catching issue." Chad, I remembered him from a brief, unpleasant introduction before I left. Young, cocky, with a resume full of trendy buzzwords and a smirk that was a cheap imitation of Dylan's. "It's Mrs. Gable in one to be, Matt," Frank continued, his voice dropping. "She's 80 years old, lives alone. Her ceiling is about to collapse from a pipe leak. She's been calling for 3 days. Chad just keeps telling her to submit a ticket online, but the portal is broken. She's been calling my personal cell, crying. I don't know what to do." The image of this poor elderly woman, terrified in her own home, made my blood run cold. This wasn't about servers and code anymore. This was about people. "It's not a catching issue, is it, Frank?" I said quietly. There was a long pause. "No, son, it's not. It feels different. It feels like the whole thing is starting to rot from the inside out." I knew exactly what it was. Tomorrow was day 60. The data archiving protocol, a powerful script I had written to run quarterly, a housekeeping measure to move old, inactive records to a deep storage server. This saved space and kept the active database lean and fast. But it wasn't, and was never meant to be, a fully automated process. It required manual supervision to distinguish between genuinely old data, like a tenant who moved out 3 years ago, and recently active data that just hadn't been updated in a few weeks. It was a failsafe, a human check in the system, to prevent exactly what was about to happen. Without my oversight, the script would run blind. It would see a 3-month-old lease agreement as inactive and archive it, making it inaccessible to the front-end system. It would see a recent payment record and do the same. It wouldn't just be a glitch. It would be a systematic, cascading data catastrophe. I explained this to Frank in the simplest terms I could. He swore a long, heartfelt curse under his breath. "I'll try to tell them," he said, but we both knew it was useless. Dylan wouldn't listen to an old maintenance guy over his new tech genius. The next day, the storm broke with full force. My phone started ringing at 9 a.m. The first call was from Dylan. His voice was laced with annoyance, not yet panic. "Hey Matt, that maintenance thing is a little worse than we thought. Chad's having some trouble tracking it down. What's the admin password for the root database?" It was such a fundamentally reckless question, like asking for the launch codes to a nuclear silo. Giving him that password would be corporate suicide. "I'm no longer an employee, Dylan," I said calmly, my voice even. "I can't give you that information. It would be a massive security breach. Don't be like that. We're family. Just help us out. You define the terms of our relationship." "Dylan, it's business, and I'm no longer in business with you," I said, and hung up. An hour later, my mother called, her voice dripping with forced sweetness. "Matthew, honey, your brother is really struggling. He's so stressed. Can't you just come in for a little while, just to point him in the right direction?" "Mum, I don't work there anymore. It wouldn't be appropriate." "Don't be so difficult, Matthew. This is your family's legacy on the line. You were the one who said it was just business." "Mum," I replied, the words colder than I intended. Smart business decision." I ended the call before she could reply. By mid-afternoon, the real panic had set in. My father called, his voice booming with rage and fear. "Matthew, the payment processing system is completely down. It's rejecting all incoming rent payments. It's the first of the month. We have millions of dollars in receivables that have just vanished. Do you know what kind of penalties we face from the banks?" "I have an idea," I said. The archiving protocol was likely treating active tenant payment profiles as inactive and locking them down one by one. "You have to fix this," he yelled, his voice cracking with desperation. "This is a disaster of your making." "My making?" I asked, a dangerous calm settling over me. I seemed to recall presenting a budget for a support team and a documentation project for 5 years running. "Who was it that called that unnecessary overhead? I'll pay you $200 an hour. Whatever you want, just come down here." This was the moment I had both dreaded and, in a dark, bitter corner of my heart, anticipated. My mind flashed back to the cold conference room, Dylan's smirk, my mother's averted eyes, my father's cold dismissal, the years of being undervalued, of my warnings being systematically ignored, a lifetime of it. Then my mind did something unexpected. It flashed back further, to a sun-drenched afternoon when I was 10 and Dylan was 6. He'd fallen off his bike and scraped his knee, blood mixing with dirt. He was wailing, and I had been the one to pick him up, dust him off, and carry him halfway home on my back. A pang of something familial duty, a ghost of brotherly affection, twisted in my gut. For a split second, I almost caved. Then my phone buzzed with a new email notification on my laptop screen. I glanced at it. The sender was Eleanor Vance. The subject, formal offer, Chief Systems Architect, Ridgeview Management. The memory of my crying little brother vanished, replaced by the crystal-clear image of Dylan's smug face in that boardroom. The internal conflict was over. My resolve hardened into something as solid and unbreakable as forged steel. "Dad," I said into the phone, my voice steady and clear as a bell, "you made a business decision. I've made one too." Before he could respond, I hung up. I opened the email from Ridgeview. The salary was 30% higher than what my father had been paying me. It included a substantial signing bonus and stock options in a thriving company. But it was more than the money. It was the title. It was the respect. It was the opportunity to build something brilliant without having to beg for the tools to do it. My phone rang again. It was Dylan, his voice frantic, hysterical. $500 an hour, Matt. $500. Just name your price. We'll give you a stake in the company. Please. I let the call go to voicemail. I typed a single word reply to Eleanor Vance. Accepted. Then I turned my phone off. For the first time in my adult life, the silence felt like peace. Starting at Ridgeview Management was like stepping out of a black and white movie into glorious Technicolor. The offices were sleek and modern, a space designed for collaboration, with floor-to-ceiling windows and an undercurrent of quiet, focused energy. On my first day, Eleanor Vance personally walked me to my new office. It was a corner office with a panoramic view of the city skyline. "This is your space, Matthew," she said, her tone direct and respectful. "Your team is comprised of 4 senior engineers, all of them top. Your budget for the first year is in the welcome packet. We hired you because you're one of the best. We trust you to build us the most robust, scalable, and secure property management platform in the industry. My door is always open. Don't hesitate to ask for what you need." What I need. The words were so simple, yet they felt revolutionary. For 15 years, my professional life had been defined by what I couldn't have. Here, I was being asked what I needed to succeed. It was disorienting in the best possible way. My new team was brilliant. They were dedicated professionals who were genuinely excited to work with me. When I laid out my initial architectural plans on a massive whiteboard, they didn't see problems. They saw possibilities. They asked smart, insightful questions. They challenged my assumptions in constructive ways. We spent an entire afternoon debating the merits of 2 different database technologies. We were collaborating, building something better together. It was everything I had ever wanted in a professional environment. One of my engineers, a woman named Sarah, found a way to optimize a search query I had designed, cutting the response time by half a second. Instead of being defensive, I was thrilled. "That's brilliant," I told her. "Implement it." The look of surprised appreciation on her face told me everything I needed to know about the culture Eleanor had built here. Meanwhile, the storm at Hayes Properties was escalating into a Category 5 hurricane. Frank kept me updated through occasional, discreet text messages, little dispatches from a war zone. They tried to restore from a server backup. One text read, "It was a week old. They wiped out the last 7 days of maintenance logs and payment records. Chad is blaming a corrupted server glitch." Another said a week later, "Dylan hired 2 more junior guys from some online freelance site. They're based in 2 different countries. It's like watching 3 kids try to solve a Rubik's Cube by hitting it with a hammer over a bad video call." The chaos wasn't just internal anymore. Tenants were furious. Negative reviews were popping up on Google and Yelp like poisonous mushrooms. Occupancy rates, once my family's proudest metric, were starting to plummet. About a month into my new role, Eleanor called me into her office. It was the same office where she'd hired me, but this time the feeling was different. I wasn't a candidate anymore. I was part of her inner circle. "Matthew," she said, gesturing for me to sit down, "you've been here a few weeks. You're getting the lay of the land. I have a task for you, something that requires your unique and intimate perspective." She pushed a file across her expansive desk. "I want a full competitive analysis of the major players in our region. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. I'm particularly interested in your professional, unbiased evaluation of Hayes Properties. I know the history, but I want your expert assessment of their current operational vulnerabilities from a purely technical standpoint." My heart skipped a beat. This wasn't a casual request. This was strategic, a corporate chess move. I spent the next week on it, working late into the night, not out of obligation, but out of a deep sense of professional pride. I was objective. I didn't write a single word about family betrayal or hurt feelings. I wrote a cold, hard technical analysis of a company in a death spiral. I detailed the custom, undocumented, and fragile nature of their IT system. I identified the single point of failure, the complete and total reliance on one person's institutional knowledge. I outlined the cascading consequences of the data archiving protocol running unchecked, explaining in excruciating detail how it would lead to catastrophic data loss, massive legal and compliance failures, and a complete and irreversible breakdown of tenant trust. My conclusion was stark. Without a top-to-bottom system rebuilt by an expert team, a process that would take months and cost millions, the company's core operational integrity was compromised beyond any hope of repair. I didn't have to guess. I knew. I had built the house, and I knew exactly where all the load-bearing walls were, and I knew they were about to collapse. One submitted the 20-page report to Eleanor. She read it in complete silence, her expression unreadable. When she finished, she placed it carefully on her desk and looked up at me. "This is devastatingly thorough," she said, a glimmer of something I couldn't quite decipher in her eyes. "Thank you, Matthew. This is exactly what I needed." A few days later, I got a final text from Frank. It was a picture of a letter printed on the heavy letterhead of Vanguard Holdings, our former largest client. The text underneath was short and to the point. "It's official. Vanguard just terminated their contract. That's 20 of our most profitable complexes gone. This is a death blow, Matt. The company is in a nosedive, and there are no parachutes. I looked at the picture, then out the window of my new office at the bustling city below. I didn't feel joy, I didn't feel sadness. I felt a profound sense of inevitability, like watching a law of physics play out. Actions have consequences. This wasn't personal anymore. It was just business. And my old family business was failing, just as I had predicted for years it would. The call from Frank about Vanguard Holdings terminating their contract was the final tremor before the earthquake. I knew what the loss of their biggest client meant. It wasn't just a financial hit. It was a public vote of no confidence that would echo through the entire regional real estate market. Hayes Properties was no longer just struggling. It was visibly sinking, and the sharks were beginning to circle. I spent the rest of that day in a state of strange, focused detachment. I led a design meeting with my team at Ridgeview, sketching out the architecture for our new state-of-the-art tenant portal. We were building something clean, modern, documented, and resilient. We were building something the right way. The contrast between my present and my past was a chasm. That evening, as I was pulling into my driveway, my headlights cut through the twilight and landed on a familiar figure sitting slumped on my front steps. It was Dylan. He looked like a ghost of his former self. His usually perfect hair was a mess. His expensive suit was rumpled and stained, and the signature smirk was gone from his face, replaced by a raw, hollow-eyed desperation that was shocking to see. I killed the engine and got out of my car, my keys jingling in the sudden silence. I walked slowly toward him. He stood up as I approached, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his shoulders hunched in defeat. "Matt," he said, his voice hoarse, broken. We need to talk." "There's nothing to talk about, Dylan," I replied, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. I kept my hand on my car door. "Please," he begged, and the words sounded so foreign coming from his lips. It was like hearing a dog speak. "Just hear me out. Vanguard is gone. The bank is calling our loans. We're going to lose everything. The company is going to go under, I see," I said. "No, you don't see," he shot back, a flash of his old arrogance returning before being immediately extinguished by a wave of despair. "It's a complete disaster. The system, it's a black box. Chad and his guys quit this morning. They took their final paychecks and just walked out. They said the whole system was unethically complex and uncodable. They said only a ghost could have built it. I'm not a ghost, Dylan. I'm the guy you told to pack his things because I was too expensive." The words hung in the cool night air between us. He flinched as if I'd physically struck him. For the first time in my life, I saw genuine shame in my brother's eyes. "I know, okay, I know. I was an idiot. I was jealous of you. Always. I hated that Dad relied on you for the important stuff. I was a stupid, arrogant fool. Dad and Mom were stupid too. We were all stupid. But this is our family's legacy, Matt. Dad built this company from nothing." "No, Dylan," I corrected him, my voice dangerously quiet, cutting through his tirade. "Dad signed the papers. I built the engine that made it run for 15 years. And you all decided to throw the mechanic out and let the chauffeur try to fix it. How did that work out for you?" He had no answer for that. He just stared at me, his face pale and haggard in the yellow glow of the porch light. "The insurance provider is threatening to drop us because our maintenance records are gone," he whispered, the words tumbling out in a rush. "The bank is threatening to freeze our assets. It's not just one thing, Matt. It's everything. It's all falling apart at once." He took a step closer. "Just help us," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "I am begging you, name your price. Any price. $1 million, a stake in the company, whatever you want. Just come back and fix it, please. You're the only one in the world who can." I looked at my brother, the golden child, the one who had everything in life handed to him on a silver platter, now brought so low that he was standing on my doorstep begging for a lifeline. A part of me, a small, tired, 10-year-old part, felt a flicker of pity, but it was buried under 15 years of being treated like a utility. It was buried under the memory of that triumphant smirk in that cold conference room. I took a deep breath, the air feeling clean and fresh in my lungs. "You said you could run the company without me, Dylan. You said it was just business. Well, this is the result of your business decision." I finally walked to my front door and unlocked it. "Now you have to live with it." I stepped inside and closed the solid oak door, the click of the latch echoing the finality of my words. I didn't watch him leave. I walked into my kitchen, leaned against the counter, and my heart was pounding, my hands shaking slightly. It was over. That was the final word, or so I thought. The next morning, I was in a strategy meeting at Ridgeview when my phone sat on the table vibrated. It was a text from Frank. My hands were still a little unsteady as I picked it up. It wasn't a message, it was a photo. A photo of a crisp white, oversized envelope lying on the reception desk at Hayes Properties. The return address was from a prestigious downtown law firm I recognized as one that handled major corporate transactions, but it was the name printed discreetly under the law firm's logo that made the air leave my lungs in a sudden rush. Ridgeview Management, my own company. I mumbled an apology and excused myself from the meeting, my mind racing a million miles a minute. I walked to the end of the hall to the window overlooking the city and called Frank. He picked up on the first ring. "What is that, Frank?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "A courier just dropped it off," he said, his voice a mixture of awe and utter disbelief. "It's addressed to your father, your mother, and Dylan." I saw the letterhead. "Matt, what did you do?" "I didn't do anything," I said, and it was the honest truth. I had no idea this was coming. I hung up and walked, almost in a trance, directly to Eleanor Vance's office. Her door was open. She saw my face and beckoned me in with a slight nod. "You've heard, I take it," she said calmly, steepling her fingers on her desk. "Heard what, Eleanor? What's going on?" "That letter." She smiled, a small, satisfied smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. It was the smile of a grandmaster who had just put her opponent in checkmate. "Your competitive analysis was very persuasive, Matthew. It pointed out a unique and time-sensitive opportunity, a company with a valuable portfolio of properties crippled by a catastrophic but eminently fixable operational failure. In the world of mergers and acquisitions, that's what we call a perfect target." She leaned forward. "The board approved the move last night. We made a formal non-negotiable offer this morning. A low one, I might add. Given their current state of extreme distress, they'll have no choice but to accept. It's either this or Chapter 7 bankruptcy." It took me a moment to process the sheer stunning scale of what she was saying. Ridgeview was buying Hayes Properties. My new employer was buying my old one. "And there's one more thing," she continued, picking up a document from her desk. It was a copy of the official offer letter, a key non-negotiable condition of this acquisition. She turned the document around and pointed to a specific clause, Section 4, Subsection B. My eyes found my own name as a binding condition of this acquisition. "Mr. Matthew Hayes, Chief Systems Architect of Ridgeview Management, will be appointed to lead the full technical audit and subsequent system integration of all Hayes Properties assets." I stared at the words, then back at Eleanor. The world tilted on its axis and then snapped back into sharp, brilliant focus. I wasn't just the guy who refused to help. I wasn't just the guy who had been vindicated. I was the guy who was now in charge. The desperate cause from my family had ended for good, because from now on, if they wanted to talk to me, they would have to schedule an appointment. The news of the acquisition detonated within the hollowed-out shell of Hayes Properties. Frank told me later that when my father opened the lawyer's letter, he read it 3 times, his face turning a shade of gray Frank had never seen before. My mother simply sat down in the nearest chair, her hands trembling, and stared into the middle distance. And Dylan just stood there, speechless. The reality of the situation finally crashing down on him with the force of a physical blow. Their company, their family legacy, was being sold for pennies on the dollar to their biggest rival, and I was the face and engine of that takeover. A week later, I walked back through the glass doors of the Hayes Properties building for the first time since I'd been so coldly dismissed. But I wasn't walking in as a shamed son. I was walking in as a senior executive from the new parent company, flanked by 2 members of Ridgeview's sharp, efficient transition team. The few remaining employees looked up from their desks as we entered, their eyes wide with a potent mixture of fear and raw curiosity. In the doorway of my father's old office, I saw them waiting for me, my parents and Dylan. They looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of their failure. "Matthew," my father started, his voice strained and uncertain. "Mr. Hayes," I corrected him, my voice polite but firm, creating an immediate and unbridgeable distance. "Perhaps we should all convene in the conference room to discuss the transition plan." The change in address, the cold professional title, hit them harder than any angry words could have. It drew a line in the sand as clear as a razor cut. In this building on this day, I was not their son or their brother. I was their new reality. We sat in the same conference room where they had unceremoniously fired me. The irony was so thick I could almost taste it. This time I sat at the head of the table, the spot my father had always occupied by right. I laid out the transition plan with calm, professional precision, my voice never wavering. I talked about asset evaluation, operational audits, and personnel reviews. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even make eye contact for longer than was professionally necessary. My cool, detached professionalism was my armor and my weapon. It was a language they understood, the language of business, and it was now being used to inform them in no uncertain terms that they had lost complete and total control. The first order of business, I said, looking at a point on the wall, just over Dylan's head, is a complete top-to-bottom overhaul of the IT infrastructure. My team will begin a full diagnostic tomorrow morning. Dylan, you'll need to provide them with all existing administrative credentials and any and all documentation. There is no documentation, Dylan mumbled, his eyes fixed on the surface of the table. I'm aware, I said, my voice as flat as a dial tone. Then you'll just provide the credentials. My team will create the documentation. We do things correctly at Ridgeview. After the meeting, as I was packing my leather briefcase, my mother approached me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Matthew, can we please just talk for 5 minutes, as a family? A part of me felt a twinge of the old guilt, but I knew that giving in, even a little, would erase the boundary I had worked so hard to establish. I had to see this through. Mum, I said, my voice softening just a fraction, a calculated measure of grace. Right now my absolute priority is to stabilize this company, to protect Ridgeview's investment. Any conversations about non-business matters are best saved for another time and another place. I then turned to her, my voice becoming formal again. We can schedule a follow-up through my assistant if you have any further operational questions. She recoiled as if I'd slapped her. The boundary was set. It was absolute. She understood. The weeks that followed were a surreal exercise in reverse engineering my own life's work. My team from Ridgeview, brilliant and efficient, marveled at the complexity and ingenuity of what I'd built single-handedly, and they shook their heads, in disbelief at the complete and utter lack of support or documentation. It's like one guy built an entire skyscraper, one of them said to me, and then they fired him and were surprised when the elevator stopped working. One of the most surreal moments came when I mandated that all remaining Hayes employees, including my brother, attend a multi-day training session on the new Ridgeview IT protocols and ethics policies. I didn't conduct the training myself, of course. I assigned it to a sharp, capable junior engineer on my team, a woman named Priya who was half Dylan's age and twice as competent. I walked past the training room at one point and glanced through the glass partition. I saw Dylan sitting at a computer terminal, his shoulders slumped as Priya patiently explained the basics of the new help desk ticketing system. He looked up, and our eyes met for a brief second through the glass. I saw shame, I saw resentment, and for the very first time in my entire life, I saw a flicker of something that looked like genuine, unadulterated respect. I just gave him a slight, almost imperceptible nod and kept walking. The message was clear. This is how a professional organization operates. This is what you threw away. 6 months passed. The integration of Hayes Properties into the Ridgeview portfolio was not just a success. It became a case study within the company. Under my leadership, we didn't just repair the old, broken system, we tore it down to the studs and rebuilt it. From scratch, it was a thing of beauty, secure, scalable, cloud-based, and so meticulously documented that any competent engineer could step in and understand it. Tenant satisfaction, which had hit rock bottom, soared. The properties that had been bleeding money were now among Ridgeview's most profitable assets. My own reputation within the company was solidified. I wasn't just the guy who had survived a nasty family betrayal. I was the guy who could turn a sinking ship into a flagship. My relationship with my family, however, remained in a state of professional, icy distance. I saw them in quarterly review meetings. I exchanged polite emails. The personal connection, the one I had once valued above all else, felt severed, perhaps permanently. Then, out of the blue, my father called my personal cell and asked me to have dinner with him, just the two of us. I was hesitant. My gut instinct was to say no, to maintain the separation. But something in his voice, a profound weariness I'd never heard before, made me agree. We met at a quiet old-school steakhouse, a neutral ground filled with the low murmur of other people's conversations. For a long while we ate in a heavy, awkward silence. Finally he put down his fork and knife, laying them neatly on his plate. He looked at me, his eyes tired and shadowed. I was wrong, Matthew, he said, the words coming out slow and heavy, as if each one was a painful weight he had to lift. Your mother and I, we were wrong. Terribly, fundamentally wrong. I didn't say anything, I just listened, my expression neutral. I wasn't going to make this easy for him. It wasn't just the money, he continued, his gaze dropping to the white tablecloth. It was pride. My pride. We made a bad investment, a speculative land deal down in Florida. It went south. We were in deep, deeper than we ever let on to anyone, especially you. We were facing the possibility of Chapter 11 bankruptcy. He took a shaky breath and a sip of water. And then Henderson, our friend, your godfather, he was in my ear constantly. He kept telling me how bloated our operational costs were, how we were living in the past. He was the one who introduced us to those consultants. He pushed it, Matt. He said it was the only smart move, the only way to free up capital and save ourselves. He made it sound so simple, so logical, a lifeline. He looked up, and for the first time, I saw not just a failed businessman, but a broken man. We were scared, and we were ashamed. It was easier to believe a stranger in a suit who told us what we wanted to hear than to admit to our own son that we had failed, that we had put the family's legacy at risk. He played on my biggest fear, that I'd have nothing to leave for Dylan. Richard, he'd say, what will Dylan inherit if this all goes south? You're doing this for him. We sacrificed you to save our own pride. This was the missing piece of the puzzle, the one that made the whole ugly picture make a terrible kind of sense. It didn't excuse what they did, not by a long shot, but it reframed it. They weren't just cruel. They were desperate, weak, and had been masterfully manipulated. Anderson, I asked quietly, why would he do that to you? He was your best friend. My father gave a bitter, humorless laugh that ended in a cough. Best friend. Yet we found out a month after the Ridgeview acquisition was announced. His lawyer accidentally sent an email to our old accountant. Henderson had a shell company set up, ready to make a lowball offer. He was planning to buy us out for 10 cents on the dollar the moment the bank called our loans. He wasn't trying to help us save the company. He was trying to push it off a cliff so he could pick through the wreckage. He shook his head slowly, the weight of the dual betrayal settling on him. We were so busy betraying you, we never saw the real snake in the grass. We sat in silence for another long minute. He had confessed. He had laid the family's shame bare on the table between us. It wasn't an apology that asked for forgiveness. It was a statement of fact, a final, painful accounting of the truth. Thank you for telling me, I said finally. It was all I could offer. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't absolution, but it was an acknowledgement. It was a fragile, tentative start. The next day, as I was wrapping up at the office, I received an email. It was from Dylan's personal account. There was no subject line. I clicked it open, half expecting another desperate plea or a bitter accusation. The body of the email contained only 3 words. You were right. It wasn't an apology. It was a concession, a surrender, a complete and total recognition of a truth he had spent his entire life denying. I stared at the 3 words on the screen for a long moment. Then, with a quiet click, I moved my cursor to the icon that looked like a small trash can. I deleted the email. I didn't need his concession anymore. My vindication didn't come from his words, or my father's confession, or the money, or the corner office. It came from the work. It always had. Today, I'm sitting in my old office. It's been renovated, of course. The walls are a cool, calming gray. The furniture is modern and minimalist, and the old wheezing server that used to hum in the closet has been replaced by a silent, powerful blade server that's connected to the Ridgeview cloud. This is my office, but it's also not. It's a symbol of how much has changed, both for the company and for me. From my window I can see the city stretching out, a vibrant landscape of possibilities. I'm no longer the guy in the back room just keeping the lights on. I'm an architect of the future for a company that values foresight over short-term savings, that invests in resilience instead of cutting corners. My family, our relationship is rebuilding. It's a slow, careful process, like trying to glue together a shattered vase. It will never be what it was, and maybe that's okay. It will be something new, something more honest. There are awkward holiday dinners filled with long silences and unspoken truths. My father is quieter now, more thoughtful. My mother tries too hard to be kind, her gestures full of a regret she can't quite put into words. Dylan is in a junior project management role at another company in another state. I hear he's doing okay. He's learning from the ground up, the way I did. Maybe one day we'll be brothers again. Maybe not. I don't feel triumph when I think about what happened. The anger, the bitterness, they've mostly faded, replaced by something quieter. What I feel is a profound and unshakable clarity. My family made a terrible mistake. They thought my value was a number that could be reduced on a spreadsheet. They thought they could swap out 15 years of dedication, experience, and institutional knowledge for something cheaper and easier. They fired their son, but they couldn't fire the consequences. They learned the hard way that the most expensive thing a company can lose isn't money, it's irreplaceable knowledge. It's trust. In the end, this was never really a story about revenge. It was a story about respect. Respect for the work, respect for experience, and ultimately, respect for yourself. Especially when the people who are supposed to love you the most forget to. You have to be the one to know your own worth, to build your own value, and to stand by it, even if you have to stand alone. You have to be willing to build your own future, brick by brick, line of code by line of code. Because a foundation built on true, undeniable value is the only one that can't ever be shaken. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. Have you ever been in a situation where your experience was undervalued in work or in life? I'd be interested to hear about it. Please share your story in the comments below.